Thank you for joining us for the full screening of Defying the Nazis, The Sharps War. I encourage you to tune in on Tuesday, September 20th on WVIZ PBS at 9 p.m. and encourage all your friends and family to do the same to see the film in its entirety again. And please, before we get this panel started, I want to invite you to join us for dessert, to digest the movie, to talk to our panelists, to talk to each other. It's such an important theme and topic, especially very relevant still today. You know, this film was about courage, was about risk, about sacrifice, about leadership in a time of depravity abroad and ambivalence at home. And so we have two panelists here today to reflect on the Holocaust from the perspectives of refugees and their saviors, and to offer thoughts about the work of activists and survivors today. Our first panelist is Reverend Joe Cherry. He is a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Cleveland, which is located in Coventry and Cleveland Heights. Reverend Joe earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Illinois and his Master of Divinity from Meadville Lombard Theological School. Reverend Joe came to Cleveland with his husband, Reverend Denis Paul, 2 years ago from the Central Valley of California. And that is Denis Paul. Did I get that right? Awesome, Denis Paul. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
I probably should have introduced myself. Sorry about that. I'm Mike Shefranco. I'm the manager of civic engagement, web, and social media here at ideastream, and I worked with WETA out of Washington, D.C. to bring this screening here to Cleveland, and the screenings are happening all over the country in other stations across the U.S. So our second, thank you. Our second panelist is Erika Gold. Erika is a Holocaust survivor from Budapest, Hungary. At the age of 11, she, along with her mother, evaded the Nazis and eventually made her way to the United States right here to Cleveland. Today, she spends a lot of her time volunteering for the Jewish community and keeping the Holocaust story alive. We'll hear more of her story in just a moment. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you.
Now, given the movie is about the Sharps and all the work that they did, I want to ask my first question from Reverend Joe to tell us the origins of the Unitarian and subsequently the Unitarian Universalist Church, its core beliefs, and what were the priorities of the church back around the time of World War I and World War II?
Well, the Unitarian Church in various kind of veins has existed for about 2,000 years, but in our most current kind of coalesced group is about 500 years old, give or take. With a strong history in Czechoslovakia and in Romania. So the American version came about in the 1800s. There was a split with the Congregationalists along the East Coast over the debate about whether Jesus was really resurrected or not and part of the Trinity or not. So we are named Unitarians because we say not. And the Universalists became prevalent because they denounced the teachings of hell. And so there's an old joke from the 1850s about the difference between a Unitarian and a Universalist, and that is that the Universalist thinks that God is too good to condemn man, and that Unitarians think that they're too good to be condemned by God, right? And so a big strain of our philosophy and theology has to do with the worth that every person has. And the old sort of idea is not salvation through someone else's actions, but our own. So salvation by character and action alone is a very, for us, ancient Unitarian thread.
And you think is that ultimately at the core of what inspired the Sharps to go and do what they did?
Well, you could hear in their own words through letters and their correspondence that was clearly going on through the entire operation and even after. The thing I'd like to just wedge in, because I can, is I sort of wish it was called Martha Sharp and her Unitarian husband, because like many couples and many Unitarians, we have been treating women more than equally than most other places, and you can see that when they were together, he admired both her mind and her spirit. She wasn't a little woman to be doted upon. She was an equal partner in this critical mission, and he had no problem acknowledging that.
And so you think that's pretty fundamental to the Unitarian faith, but also to them as a couple and what they were able to do?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty typical thing. I feel like we understand that every person has potential and value and can grow and evolve, and that has not been limited to the men. You know, and you can see clearly going back even this far, that's pretty clear in their relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, Erika, I want to turn to you as a refugee yourself. Can you tell us your story of how you escaped and how you made your way to Cleveland?
Sure. I'm going to try to be kind of short. But because of this film, I just want to impress on everybody. And every time I give a talk to youngsters or older people or whoever, I always tell them that without somebody's help, we wouldn't be here. Even the few survivors who did survive, somebody had to help them. And this was fantastic. I mean, I was really moved. But anyway, as we heard that saw here, Hitler came to power in 1933, but Hungary was on the side of the Germans, meaning that they left us alone. We were okay, and we had a relatively normal life. There was anti-Semitism, everybody knew that, but as a small child, I was not affected. I could do whatever I wanted to do or go wherever I wanted to go. When it was time for me to go to school, the public schools would only take 2% of the student body could be Jewish. So my parents put me in a Jewish day school, which eliminated that problem. So I was still okay. But then the war was almost over, and as I understand, the Hungarians, knowing that the Russians are coming very close, they wanted to make a special peace with the United States and England, and Hitler found out, and that's when they occupied Hungary. They occupied Hungary in 1944, March 19th, and what they have done in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary in 2 months or less, which is amazing. The Maltz Museum just had an exhibit on Eichmann, and one of the little papers, the awards that he received, because he was a big part of the Hungarian deportation, in November 1944, he got a paper that said it's an award for him to be so efficient to transport 400,000 Jews to the camps in less than 2 months. And that's what they did. So by July 1st, all the outskirts, the small towns or bigger towns, any town in Hungary was completely cleared out of Jews. The only Jews were left were in Budapest. And even there, that was just men, old people, women, and children. The men they were already called up, like I mentioned. They came in on the 19th of March. In April 1st, we had to wear a yellow star. So that's very fast. It had to be a certain size, a certain shade, a certain way of made it, and we had it. I don't know how, but we had it. Then also the same in April, a law came out that non-Jewish people could not work for Jews. My dad, we had a housekeeper at our apartment who was not Jewish, and she had to leave. And my dad had a clerk in his store who wasn't Jewish. He had to leave, but there it didn't make any difference because he had to close the store and report to a forced labor camp. So he was there My mother and I'm an only child. My mother and I were in the apartment alone. And then my grandfather sent a message. They lived like an hour and a half, 2 hours from Budapest, that they had to move out of their house and move in with another family. And then after that, we did not hear anything from them until maybe June. In June, my grandfather sent another message that they are going to be taken out of town. And we found out later on, of course, what happened. All the Hungarians were straight taken to Auschwitz. They were put in the cattle cars, as many as they could fit in. They went straight to Auschwitz. There, Dr. Mengele separated them. Anybody that he felt could work went on one side. Anybody that he felt was too old, too young, too sickly looking, or women with children went on the other side, and unfortunately that other side was the gas chamber. They say it took about an hour and a half from the train, when the train stopped, that these people were all gassed and cremated. An hour and a half, they were gone, thousands of people gone. But we didn't know any of that. So then we were still in Budapest, and then, as I mentioned, all the Jews from all the other towns were gone, and the only ones were in Budapest. So then they got set up homes where they accepted that Jews can live, and other apartments they couldn't. So we had to move. My mother had an aunt who lived in an apartment that was okay for the Jews. And that time they wanted, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a family. That meant that if you had one bedroom, a dining room, a bath, and a kitchen, that was 4 rooms. So 4 whole families had to occupy that space. So that was kind of crowded, but at least we were related. It was a little bit easier.
And so at what point did you and your mother go into hiding?
So that's what I'm...
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
No, take your time.
Okay, I'm trying
Take
to
your
get
time.
there.
Take your time.
October 1st, a new regime came, took over the Arrow Cross, and they were even meaner than the others. And they were going to take care of the rest of us. So first they called the women up. My mother had to go to this big sporting arena where the Nazis had no idea how many women are going to show up. And because of the fact that they had to write everything down, everything was documented by them. So nobody can really say that it didn't happen. It was documented by them. And by the end of the day, they were not finished. So they said anybody who was not registered can go home, and the others stay, and the people who were not registered will be called another time. So my mother was fortunate enough not to be registered. When she came home, she said she's not going back when they're going to call them. So she said she'll figure out something we can do. She found out there was a factory that was making soldier uniforms that was important for the war effort. If we could get in there, they'll save us, like the Schindler's List. Although we didn't know about the Schindler's List. But anyway, we were fortunate enough to get in there, and we were there. We never went out. We had we worked during the day, and at night we slept on the factory floor on the soldier uniforms. And that's how we existed. While we were there, my dad sent a message that he's going to be taken away from where he was, and he just wanted us to know. My mother found out at that point that there was neutral country diplomats in Budapest at that time trying to save the remaining Jews of Europe, because we were it. And she was able to get a paper from the Swiss government. It's a protected paper. It was sent to my dad. We had no idea if it helped. But later on, we found out that he was already in the train, and the Nazi let him out. By that time, there was a ghetto in Budapest, and he survived there the remaining time. So we were in this factory in November 1944. December 1st, the Nazis came and took us all away. There were 300 women and children in this place, and no matter what anybody said, everybody had to go. Some of us were on trucks, other people were walking, and we were going around Budapest all day long, not knowing where we're going to end up. And then at the end of the day, we arrived to a busy marketplace. People were doing their weekend shopping. It was a Friday afternoon. And the Nazis said, we're going to stop here. Nobody should get out of line or get off the trucks. So with that, the truck that my mother and I were on stopped. My mother jumped off. She winked at me, and we walked away. Obviously, nobody saw us, or they didn't care. By that time, we knew where our housekeeper lived, and we had a very good relationship with her, thank God. And my mother asked her if we could come in for a couple of days to see what we're going to do. And she said yes. She had a daughter my age. So by saying yes, she could have sacrificed her daughter and herself, but she did it. Without her, I wouldn't be here. But anyway, there was no place to go, so we stayed there. We never went outside. Even her sister didn't know, who used to drop in, didn't know. So then the Russians finally arrived on the 15th of January, and then 3 days later, my dad came and found us, which was a miracle because there are very few families that they were intact like that. And so we went back to our old apartment, which was still there and empty. But we wanted to come to the United States even before the war. So we had a visa going. I mean, like asking for a visa was already in the American consulate, but it wasn't coming. The numbers are very small. So by 1948, when the Russians were getting very communistic in Hungary, made everybody a communist, my dad found out that the Cuban government is selling visas, and if he buys us visas, we can go to Cuba and wait for the American visa there, and we'll be closer to the United States and out of Europe. So that's what happened. We had to wait another 2 years in Cuba before we got the visa, but then we came to Cleveland because in order to have an exit, an American permanent visa, you had to have somebody sponsoring you. And my mother had a brother and a sister in Cleveland, and they sponsored us.
So before I go back to Joe, I lost track of time a little bit. How long were you in hiding at your
Actually,
housekeeper's?
it was a very, very long 6 weeks. When you say 6 weeks, it doesn't sound that bad. But it was believe me, it was a very long time, 6 weeks.
And like in the movie, were there moments when there were, you thought you'd be found?
Oh, yeah.
Would someone stop by, or you?
Her sister used to drop in, and then we had to hide even from her. We would go under a bed or in a little closet. He had a little closet in the kitchen, and we had to stay there motionless until she left.
Yeah.
Even she didn't trust her sister enough to not tell anybody.
Anything,
Yeah.
So Joe, I want to come back to you. In the Unitarian Church, in the Unitarian faith, are the Sharps, are they known figures in the history of the church? Are they looked to as examples of what to do, how to act, how to...
I think they'll be better known now. there's this lore about this couple, and so people know there was a couple who did this work, but really not really who they were or their story in the way that's being told now. So, you saw briefly Norbert Chapak on the screen. His wife came to the U.S. She was a minister with him, and so there was this kind of cross-Atlantic work, and she stayed and worked with refugees until she retired in the late 50s herself with the AUA. So there was this work going on well after the war.
So if they're, now they will be known based on what you said, but in the Unitarian faith, and should I say Unitarian Universalist faith? Yes, thank you. I can get a nod of approval. Who are regarded as sort of the examples, the models of the faith and of the behaviors to follow? And
At the risk of really bragging and taking a long time.
Other than you.
No, I'm not, believe me. I would say, we are everywhere in American history, and people don't really know about us because we don't talk about ourselves. So just a quick list would be Emerson, Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Harry Beecher Stowe. That's just the people involved in like abolition and all that. And then there's, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and other folks involved in women's suffrage and and then there's the gay rights movement, and then what we're doing now with Black Lives Matter. It's less centralized now, but we still have the same call to use the hands we have to make the world better, and you can see that in the work that they did as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that's a good transition. Let's talk about the work being done today to help those who are marginalized and disenfranchised. What are some issues that the Unitarian Universalist Church is addressing today, and how do they come to agree upon what issues they're going to prioritize?
So we're not quite as monolithic as that sounds. We are a democratically run faith, so we get together once a year in different cities, and we choose our issues by vote. So everything from our local congregations to our whole association depends completely on democratic process. So if you have an interest in a certain topic that you're really passionate about, you bring it to the group, you gather steam, you convince others, there's a vote, and then we put effort behind that. One of the most surprising things to me in the movie was when Elliot told Sharp they were going back, because there's no way that would happen today. If I got a call from Boston saying you're going to blah, 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 I would say, says who? I was really shocked by that, actually.
So there's been a cultural shift. So back then it was a little more top-down, you would say? Or
No.
No.
So it was, I'm going to look into that. I'm very curious about that.
So you're saying that's a unique circumstance. That wasn't a sort of a general practice.
It's partly about relationship. During the Civil Rights March and the March in Selma, when Martin Luther King called his friends in Boston, who he went to seminary with, he said, "I need you here." That's about relationship. And so they called their friends, and they all said, okay, so a full third of our ministers went down to Selma, and with very short notice, because it's about relationship. And I think that's one of the things that our church tries to do best, is be in relationship with people who are not just like us. We are not perfect at that. We have lots of lessons to learn, but it is our thrust, our sort of movement is always based on relationship.
Are you aware of other Unitarian and Unitarian Universalists at the time that were very much involved in any way with World War II and the Holocaust?
Well, like I said, Norbert Chapak was involved, and he was in the film, and his wife came here, and she was also working, and but it's not that old a history yet, so I don't know more than that about it.
Okay, no, that's fair. And Erika, you do a lot in the community, you volunteer at various Jewish organizations, and it's very important to you, as I understand, to keep telling your story and the story of the Holocaust. So tell us a little bit about your volunteer efforts, and why is it important to you to keep that story alive?
I have a pinan that says in Hebrew, to remember, never to forget. And that's what we're trying to do. We're hoping, it's not happening, but we're hoping that by talking about it, and people knowing what happened, that it will never happen again. But it's not working, unfortunately.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's happening all over the world. People are killing each other because of their faith or religion or color or what have you.
So, so who do you think is doing important work today to try to mitigate some of those issues? Because obviously they're happening, but who's doing important work?
As far as I'm concerned, that I see, it's the teachers. And there are a lot of teachers who do a lot of work and because of the Holocaust, but not only about the Holocaust, other genocide. And it's very important. The Maltz Museum has a contest every year, Stop the Hate. And it's $100,000 worth of contest, and the kids write in, and it's amazing how many kids today in Cleveland have problems, I mean big problems, that they can write about.
Do you know what some of those problems are that they write about?
All kinds. There is about color, about being too big, too small, having some physical problems. They've been, it's amazing what these kids do and what they go through. Last year we had a Palestinian girl who, they live here for I don't know how long, and she had to prove that she's not the enemy. So it's, and in Shaker Heights, unfortunately, they're still having a problem with the black and white issue.
Joe, we talked a little bit about this, in the green room. What issues do you think the Sharps would really champion today and really throw themselves into today? Would they travel to Syria? Would they travel to Israel? Would they, or would they stay here and work on domestic issues? What do you think would be their priority?
Well, I feel like, just at first blush, it feels like at the time the Sharp went to Europe, domestic life seemed, clean and neat and pretty tidy if you were particularly white and all that. So I feel like now it'd be more likely that people would be called to go to places like St. Louis or to work in Black Lives Matter and intersectionality, how things are linked together. They're not just, people aren't suffering problems in isolation, they're linked together. And I feel like we do a lot of work in that arena. And so it's not quite as neat an answer as it might have been 70 years ago when things seemed simpler, but probably weren't.
So you think, excuse me, so you think they would stay domestically and get involved in some of the racial tensions? And
It's possible, but even now we've got a United Nations office, we've got Unitarians and Universalists around the world working on things, so it's hard to say, and it depends really on the call of the individual, whether they're a layperson or an ordained minister. That's part of our the way we do things. You can be a layperson and feel called to do this work, and that's just as valid as if I decided as a reverend to go and do it.
Sure. What are some of the top priorities of the Unitarian Universalists in Cleveland or greater Cleveland? What issues are you involved in?
So there are 5 congregations here in Cleveland, and we have the ministers and some lay folks have appeared together in places like a women's health clinic. When Tamir Rice was shot, we wrote a joint letter for the first time ever, and 13 of us signed that letter. So we're involved, I think, in what most people are interested in, but there isn't one single thrust. That just isn't how we operate.
So Erika, I know you really wanted to provide some reflection on the movie itself. You did a little bit at the beginning, but in some closing comments, what was your reflection of the film and what it portrayed?
It was very, there was just one thing that I was surprised. At the end when they were showing Yad Vashem and the righteous Americans, they mentioned Mr. Fry from France, but his partner was Mr. Bingham's, who they mentioned him in the film because they did a lot of work to get Jews out of France, but he didn't get the award at Yad Vashem, so that surprised me.
Can you explain maybe for those who don't know what Yad Vashem is?
Oh, Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And it's a beautiful, very well done.
So you're saying one of them was acknowledged there, but the other wasn't?
Right,
Okay.
right. And it just happened that Mr. Bingham, because of his work, we were trying to get an American stamp in his name. And I collected, 2,000 signatures. And he did get the maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a stamp with his face on it.
Okay.
So we got that.
Reverend Joe, what about you? What reflections do you have on the film itself and its portrayal of the Sharps and the war?
I've seen a lot of, I have a degree in American history, so I've seen a lot of movies about this and studied this, and I have tended in the past to look away because it's so abhorrent and unpleasant. And because I knew I'd be talking, I had to pay attention to everything. So it was a new way of witnessing to that for me in a way I hadn't done before. And I look forward to watching it again and really trying to take it all in. I was really pleased with how well featured Martha was, that she wasn't just the ancillary wife who did, whatever her husband said. Clearly that was not the case, and that gives me some pride in the way my faith treats our people.
And you had also mentioned that the Unitarian Universalist Church is going to be doing something related to this film.
Right.
You want to maybe mention that?
Then the 20th is going to be the showing of this. And
On
that's
WVIZ PBS.
on
9 p.m.
Make
Thanks
popcorn.
for that. Thanks for the plug.
That's what I'm here for. On the Sunday following, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which helped with this effort, has asked us all to have a Sunday based on this movie. And you may have picked this up, we don't always do things unified. But I think that it's a pretty good shot that most of us will do a sermon or service on this. And my seminary put out a 65-page study guide about this movie and how to do actions and whatnot related to it and how to engage your congregation. So I feel like this is some pretty big legs. And if we do it carefully, it might lead us into more contemporary things that are a little riskier than we're doing now.
Okay. And where can someone go to find out more, maybe if they're interested in attending one of these or being a part of one of these sessions?
So you can always visit my church's website, which is uucleveland.org. And there'll be something there, I'm guessing now by Friday. I wasn't prepared for that, but I'll
Because you're going to be the one posting it, right? So it's going to be a late night.
No, it'll happen. I don't know. But I wasn't ready for that. But thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you sticking with us despite the early challenges with the fire drill. We assure you it was not part of the movie at all. And we thank you very much for staying here. We thank our panelists for their contributions, and again, invite you to stick around for dessert, mingle with the panelists, with each other, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me into this.